Some people are having them. But anyway. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen, Muhammad al-Mustafa, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum everybody, inshallah, welcome back. We're going to continue, inshallah, with our class here, just exploring the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we had left off last time just going we had talked a little bit about like his grandfather, Shayba, otherwise known as Abdul Muttalib. And so we'll pick up there going into, inshallah, kind of getting close to the beginning of his nabuwah, inshallah, alayhi salawatu wassalam. So he said, you know, he ultimately, at one point, comes under the care and the protection of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who takes over after the death of both of the parents of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And unfortunately, he himself doesn't last very long in the care of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Matter of fact, approximately, there's between the passing of his mother to the passing of Abdul Muttalib is approximately 2 years. And a couple things. So Abdul Muttalib was, during his time, was considered a really exceptional man. And he was considered very noble, not only just amongst his own clan of Banu Hashim, but amongst the Quraysh kind of in their entirety. And he had the responsibility of the siqaya and the rifada, right? This is what they will call like the giving water to the Hajjaj, right, to the people that would come to the Kaaba, even though they were at this time, you know, practicing idolatry. This was considered a noble responsibility. So this practice of the siqaya and the rifada was something that was the responsibility of Abdul Muttalib, and upon his passing, this then transfers to his son Abu Talib, right? Abu Talib, of course, is the brother, the older brother of the father of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdullah. So unfortunately, he only stays in the care and the looking after. There's Nasim, alhamdulillah. Looks like he made it. So he only looks after the Prophet ﷺ for about 2 years. Now, during the early years of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a practice amongst the Arabs of essentially they would give their children to the Bedouins. And it's interesting when you think about this. I've always thought, like, it's curious that while we couldn't necessarily really say that it is a sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was something interesting, right? The practice of taking their children and getting them out of the city and letting them essentially spend the early years of their life in a very rugged, austere, but also pure environment with the Bedouins. And so the Prophet ﷺ spends this time with, of course, she has known by two names, Ayman and also Baraka bint Tha'alaba. So Baraka, or Ayman, may Allah be pleased with her, becomes the wet nurse of the Prophet ﷺ, and in fact is recorded to have said, Hiya ummi ba'da ummi radiyallahu anha, that he referred to her, that you are my mother after my mother. And we remember that the Prophet ﷺ was very young when his own mother passed, so he didn't really know his mother incredibly well, and in fact, because of this practice of the more settled Arabs, of having their children go out with the nomadic Arabs in the desert, he didn't know his mother incredibly well, and of course passed away when he was very young. So she really becomes a mother-like figure for him. And she will play an important role as we learn more about her also later on as we continue reading about his life. So just a quick backstory. So essentially, Abdullah marries a woman named Amina bint Wahab. And this is slightly important because she came from Banu Zuhra, right? And you'll, hopefully as we go along, you'll begin to pick up or, remember some of the names of the clans, because they do become important later on in some of the various events. And she herself was considered to be of an esteemed background in her own family from this tribe. And it's interesting that when you begin to piece together some of the pieces, for instance, so Barakah comes into the Prophet's life through a couple of different ways. So one, as we said, she was the wet nurse, but then also she comes into the service of the family of the Prophet ﷺ actually through his parents, Abdullah, and his mother, Amina. So she's considered actually, Barakah is considered to be, by some scholars, the third person to embrace Islam. So of course, the Prophet ﷺ, after having his encounter in the cave with Jibreel, comes home, tells his wife Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, about what happens. She accepts and becomes what is generally by consensus the first Muslim is Khadija. Others say that the second person is then Ali, who was in the household, and then Barakah. Some people say actually Barakah, may Allah be pleased with her, is the third person to accept Islam. So she has a son with a man whose name was Ubayd ibn Zayd. And they have a son named Ayman, and this is where she becomes known as Ayman. And actually, their son that they have, his name is Usama, right? So she and Ubayd ibn Zayd have a son named Usama bin Zayd, who becomes actually one of the great commanders of the Muslim army later on. So you'll see how through some of these personal connections, how these people come into the life of the Prophet ﷺ and how then they may play an important role later on. So she then remarries later on with Zayd ibn Haritha, who is actually the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ. And Zayd is another, may Allah be pleased with him, another amazing figure in our history. And inshallah we will learn some more about him. What is remarkable is that you look at how the Prophet ﷺ creates powerful relationships around him. Now this is a man, alayhi salatu salam, that has experienced some pretty significant loss in his life at a very early age. So his father, basically before he's born, his mother shortly after he's born, his grandfather not very long after that, and then to his uncle, Abu Talib. A lot of loss even before, he gets married, and what incredible loss. And yet one of the defining characteristics of the personality of the Prophet ﷺ is his capacity to create strong empathy and bonds with people. So he refers again to Barakah, Ayman, as what? Ummi hiya ummi ba'ada ummi. She is my mother, she is like my mother after my mother. And then Zayd ibn al-Haritha, what? He is the slave who was set free by the Prophet ﷺ, who then when his people find him, when his father and some of the men of his own tribe, after they finally track him down after all these years, and they offer the Prophet ﷺ, say, look, whatever your price is, we will pay it to set him free. And the Prophet ﷺ says, well, look, if Zayd wants to go with you, there will be no price. You just go, right? But if he wants to stay, then let him stay. And of course, he goes in front of the Kaaba and makes a proclamation stating that Zayd is now my son and he will inherit from me and so on. So he has a mother that comes into his service actually through the nephew of his wife, or of his future wife, right? So Khadija, she has essentially a gift of barakah given to her by her nephew, and then when she marries the Prophet ﷺ, she actually gives barakah as a gift to the Prophet ﷺ, which he frees her and then refers to her as his mother after his mother. And then his adopted son later on marries his adopted mother. These are some really powerful connections that we see that the Prophet ﷺ is able to bring people into his life, but then also bring them together, right? He's able to bring them together. And these are things we should reflect upon as, when we interact with people. Do we try to bestow upon people that kind of empathy, right? Because, these people came from different tribes. As we'll see, going forward, this person was from this tribe, and this person was from this tribe, and this tribe had issue with this tribe, as we would say, this tribe had beef with this tribe, and so on and so on. And yet the Prophet ﷺ was an incredible people person. Not simply to benefit himself, right? Not like a used car salesman, but as a person of true and genuine empathy, that he brought people together and made them to also benefit themselves. So, as we said, barakah comes into the service of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, initially through his parents, and then eventually is given to the Prophet ﷺ, is given to him as a gift. And also, as a side note on Zayd, as we move on to something else, what's also interesting is that while we refer often to the Prophet ﷺ as Al-Habib, right, Allah's beloved, Habib Allah, he refers to Zayd, his adopted son, as his Al-Habib, as his beloved. So again, just wanting to highlight some of the very important emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ. He was a person who was not only fasih, he was not only fasih, he was not only a person who was very eloquent in his speech, but he was also a person that was incredibly gifted from a emotional point of view and not only an intellectual point of view. And that should be something very important for us that we consider. So as we said, his parents pass away very early in his life, and then he goes on to be raised with one of the tribes, Banu Sa'ad. Banu Sa'ad was one of the tribes out in the desert, and he grew up with some of the kids out there, and this is where he learned the Arabic language with Banu Sa'ad. And in fact, there's some discrepancy about this hadith. I wanted to mention this because I know that some of you may have heard it. And there's many different narrations of this hadith, and I'll read one of them to you, even though some of them there's a slight play in the words, where the Prophet ﷺ is alleged to have said, "Ana sayyidu waladi Adam, I am the most noble of the children of Adam. Bayda anni min Quraysh, and this is because I am from Quraysh. Wa nashittu fi Bani Sa'ad, I grew up with Bani Sa'ad. وَاسْتَرَأْتُ فِي بَنِي زُهْرَةَ, but I was suckled, I was wet nursed with Bani Zuhra." Now the issue with this, and there's actually another riwayah, another narration which says, وَأَنَا أَفْسَحُ الْعَرَبِ بَيْدَ أَنِّي مِنْ قُرَيْشٍ. Right? He said, I am the most eloquent of the Arabs, and this is because I'm from Quraysh, and when nashittu fi Bani Sa'ad, I grew up with Bani Sa'ad. The issue with this statement is that there is no solid chain of narration. And while we accept this on the general maqam of the Prophet ﷺ, there is a couple things actually to consider in this. Because I say this, I know that when people teach, when they teach Sirah Nabawiyah, when they teach the prophetic biography, often in the beginning when they discuss how the Prophet ﷺ grew up, they will often mention this. But there are a couple things to consider with this statement, that he is Afsah al-Arab. In fact, one thing that may contradict this, and perhaps this is why we don't actually find any solid chain of narration going back to the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, and some scholars consider this to be of the zawaid or the ziyada, meaning that it may have more than likely been a statement of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ who were rightfully praising him, and over time it became confused with an actual qawl or an actual statement of the Prophet ﷺ. So if we look, for instance, in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah says, بل قالوا أضغاث أحوال بل افتراه بل هو شاعر فليأتنا بآية كما أرسل الأولون. And actually one of the things that the Quraysh initially were saying to the Prophet ﷺ is that no, he's just making all this stuff up, like basically he's just dreamed this up, or بل افتراه, he's invented it or he's made it up, or what? بل هو شاعر, oh, he's a poet. Now a poet is somebody considered to be actually very eloquent, and the Prophet ﷺ himself had denied himself being a poet. And also in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah says, it says, وَإِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ, right? This is nothing other than the statements of a noble messenger. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ, right? They are not the statements of a poet. قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ, how little you believe and how little you comprehend. So I say this not to turn on its head, because as we agree, خَيْرَ الْهَدِي هَدِي مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, the best advice and the best guidance is of course that of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And actually what's interesting, when you really study the hadith and you study the statements of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and you study his words, indeed he is fasih, he is eloquent, but not in the way of a poet. And in fact, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ is very economic in his wording, very, doesn't speak a whole lot, and yet gives a very powerful meaning and very powerful statement. And indeed, of course, in terms of i'rab and balagha and what, yes, he's definitely very fasih. But just wanting to make a note that often this statement is a given. In fact, Ibn Kathir in his tafsir relates this, and one of the scholars here writes, قال الحافظ ابن كثير رحمه الله في تفسيره للآخر, he says Surah Al-Fatiha, in talking about in Surah Al-Fatiha, he said, لا أصل له, there is no foundation for this statement in terms of we cannot trace its chain of narration back, right? So we agree this, he said that, for instance, when it comes to this, معناه صحيح ولكن لا أصل له, its meaning is sound. However, we cannot find any basis for this, meaning that we should not hold this up as some kind of pillar of faith that one must believe in, right? But generally, we accept it as a praise of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he, like many of the Anbiya, he tends sheep for a while, and he lives a very simple and austere life, and was known to even be very, very honest as a child. So some of the ulama have said that the isma of the Prophet ﷺ extends even into his childhood before Nabuwah. Others differ, because they say, for instance, in the passage in Surah Ad-Duha, where Allah talks about وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى, and we found you misguided and then guided you. Many of the scholars have said that actually the Prophet ﷺ, while he did not worship idols, obviously was not guided to Islam before his nubuwwah. So this is a part of contention. Some Muslims get very, very upset about this, and it's interesting that clearly this verse, or this chapter in Surah Ad-Duha, is addressing the Prophet ﷺ because it's in the voice of second person. You know, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Right? مَا وَدَّعَكَ. It's in the second person. It's clear that this early surah is addressing the Prophet ﷺ, and yet for some reason people sometimes get offended when we come to this verse and they understand it in that way. So he leads a very, very simple life, and then while he's with the family of Barakah and with her son Abdullah, that's when we have the encounter between the two angels. Many of us are familiar with this, where two angels come to the Prophet ﷺ and they lay him down and they split his chest open, they take his heart out, they wash it with what? Zamzam, they clean it, and they remove the impurity that is put on all of the Atfal of Adam, all of the children of all of Bani Adam. We all have this mark from Shaitan, right? Of this impurity. Allah has the angels remove this from him and then puts it back. And in fact, the seal of his nubuwwah is on the back, and some had said there was even still a mark there from when they did this. And what's remarkable is the way that this is described, considering the fact that this was done over 1400 years ago, before at least any semblance of modern technology, that it was appeared to have been put in a vessel on what looked like to be ice, and it was washed. And if you look at, what we do today with heart transplant, I mean, it pretty much follows verbatim the technique that we know of today. And this was to remove any impurity in the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's being prepared even at this time for his eventual role in his role in being Prophet ﷺ. And then we also have the Hilf al-Fudul, right? This is where there was a big conflict between some of the tribes, and the Prophet ﷺ was brought together where they eventually, came to the Kaaba. They put the black stone on the piece of cloth, of which he had the various leaders pick it up, and then it was raised and it was put into its place in the Kaaba. And he said that this is one of the things from his time before his nubuwwah that he couldn't have been more happier to have participated in. And this shows the esteem that the people had for the Prophet ﷺ, which also comes to play a major role later on in why some people both accept the message from him, like without question, well, he's Al-Amin. Okay, we accept it. And there are other people that are kind of like, we can't believe you're saying these things because you are Al-Amin. So it's interesting how, depending where people were in their relationship with him, his status as being Al-Amin, sometimes it served him well in terms of in his delivering the message to people, and then there are other times where it did not serve him as well. And then he has his marriage with Khadija, and as we said, it's actually in this that not only does she bestow him the gift of barakah, of which then he sets free, right? It's also this is a remarkable thing to think of, that this is going to be the greatest prophet amongst all of the Anbiya, the greatest human being, and yet he's working for his wife. He is taking her business and her money and trading on her behalf, and then moves into her house. So it really gives, it really shows the humility of the character of the Prophet ﷺ, because a lot of men would perhaps feel very uncomfortable to do those things, especially to move into your wife's house versus being it in the reverse, where, and say in a more traditional sense, the woman would move into the man's house. So we're given a picture up into his marriage with Sayyidat Khadija, right, radiyallahu anha, of a person who is simple, humble, honest, is respected for his outward characteristics. Now, at this point, nobody knows that he's going to become a prophet. Nobody knows any of these grandiose things that are going to happen in the future. They just simply have respect for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not even because he comes from some noble lineage, right? Because again, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib was respected by everybody. They come to ultimately really revere him and respect him and honor him simply for his outward characteristics. And sometimes we like to belittle and we like to think of everything in Islam is the inner and not the outer. Well, it depends. This really shows that the Prophet ﷺ had the perfect balance. This is why some of the scholars called him Insan Kamil. He was Bashar Kamil. He was a complete person. That there was no difference between the inward and outward aspects of the Prophet ﷺ. He was complete. And this is why people could love him simply for the characteristics that he exuded through his behavior, which is something important for us to think of as well, that we want to also exude our Islam. We want to have our Islam be seen through the way that we deal with people, through our honesty, through our integrity. How many of us would love to be beloved and trusted by people, not because of a title that they have, but simply because of how they treat people, and that a person can be so honest that people will actually give and turn over their finances to you and say, here, I trust you to I trust you to do business for me that is going to what? Put a roof over my head and feed me, and so on and so on. Like, these are some of the really admirable qualities of the Prophet ﷺ. We have about 3 minutes before Zoom kicks us out, and then inshallah we can jump back in. Any questions on what was covered thus far? Yeah. Which, really our community then, if he is Rasulullah and he was known as Al-Amin, one of the characteristics our community should definitely be known as is we are a trustworthy community. People should be able to come to us. Obviously, we would have to have some knowledge of business, but let's say if you had the business acumen, the investment knowledge, we should be honest enough that it's so apparent that people should be willing to trust us. And I think that is something we don't reflect upon enough, the importance of how we are perceived. Now, we want to be respected and liked for all of these other reasons, right? But the Prophet ﷺ wasn't concerned with being respected, but was so respectful that people then entrusted themselves to him, right? Had nothing to do with status. In fact, the most vile people that he had to deal with, unfortunately some of them, even some of his relatives, right, the way that they treated him was actually because he was so honest. They were like, if you could just stop saying that you're a prophet, stop saying these things about Lat and Uzza, about our gods that we worship, stop saying these things. We'll give you whatever you want. And in fact, it's because of his earnestness and honesty that some people despised him, which also means that, we should also consider, we don't want to necessarily be liked by everyone. We want to be liked by the right people for the right reasons. We want to be trustworthy, honest, dependable, all of those qualities that the Prophet ﷺ embodies. At the same time, the people that are not honest and the people who are not trustworthy, we don't want them thinking like, yeah, that's my boy. We don't want them thinking that. So if we get kicked out, just go to the link again and we'll jump back in so we can finish this part leading up that includes some of the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ. Anybody else have any thoughts, questions, comments? That's actually a really good one, Nassim. So when the Prophet ﷺ married Khadija, here comes Ishaq. Wait for him to get back in here. So as we said, the Prophet ﷺ was a man, while having all of those wonderful, admirable qualities, he was, however, right, he was not a rich man. He did not have a lot of means. And yet, Khadija clearly saw something in him that was very special. So but most of the ulama said that the dowry that was given to Khadija was 20 camels, and that actually her cousin, Warqa bin Nawfal, was the one who delivered essentially the little speech, the khutbah for their marriage. One part I always like to highlight in the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ, and since we're all adults, shouldn't, but this is an important topic we need to broach in our community. So Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, had been married before. She was widowed. And our community tends to put a very bizarre emphasis on virginity and not so much chastity, and tends to, let's say, besmirch or denigrate women who, say, either are widowed or divorced as being some kind of damaged goods. And this is most certainly not in keeping with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I have said many times that the Muslims themselves seem to have become more Victorian than the British in our understanding of human sexuality. And I'm very serious about this. That while we certainly do put an emphasis on chastity, right? Like people should not be having illegal sexual intercourse and being loose and so on. But if a person has been chaste their whole life, has not committed zina, right? Has led a pure life, if through some circumstance, either they divorce or their husband is perhaps killed in an accident or something, that person should not be seen as damaged goods. And I see a great fitna in our community. One of the great challenges in our community is particularly for Muslim women to get married, and especially if that person is either a widow or a divorcee. And the Prophet ﷺ has married numerous women out of his wives that were either married before or widowed, right? The emphasis was on what? The character, right? The content of their character, and what they were about. One of the great lessons we could learn, and certainly could improve our community. I see a lot of Muslim women, unfortunately, they feel like, if I divorce for some reason, or if my husband passes away, oh boy, that's it. I'm basically condemned to a life of involuntary monasticism, celibacy, and loneliness, quite honest, right? This is something that when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, where do we get this from if we claim to be followers of the Prophet ﷺ? Now, yes, like for instance, my daughter, inshallah, when she is of age to marry, naturally I'm going to do everything within my power to ensure that my daughter grows up and when she marries for the first time is a virgin. But this is a subset of a more important conversation about chastity, right? And that if by some, if whatever Allah's qadr is, that a person's husband passes away or they divorce, we should not look upon people as damaged goods. And this is where I was saying in the beginning, the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, he was able to see value in people in a way that is just absolutely not only extraordinary and admirable, but you can see why he was himself such a healing force for people. And this is something we should definitely reflect upon for ourselves. And, divorce happens. I myself am a, divorcee. And sometimes divorce is necessary. Everybody does what they put in their best effort, but something happens. Or, it is somebody's qadar that they pass away. People should not be forced to go into some artificially imposed loneliness. It is our nature. Allah has created us and our nature to be together. Allah has said that, وَخَلَقَنَا مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا, right? We have created from you pairs. We're meant to be together. So this is certainly one of the real hikam, one of the wisdoms of the Prophet ﷺ, is that he was not obsessed with this. He did not see this as a negative quality in a person. He was more involved. What is the person's heart? What is their stance towards deen? What do they bring? Overall, not just simply, this happened to this person. They're not some pure virgin, which also dispels, right? It throws on its head. This is why some of the muhaddithun, the scholars of hadith, have actually debated about the age of Aisha. Some have said no, that this is not correct, that her age was not as young as it was, that she actually was of an older age when she married. And others have said even if the age was, even if we accept the age of Aisha when the Prophet ﷺ married her, clearly the age of all of his other women were all older and adult age, and even some women being much older. So there was not a fixation or fascination on a young virgin girl. Even though there are some hadith, obviously the Prophet ﷺ says he encourages people, right, marry young and so on and so on. But all of those are in a certain kind of context, and I think that these are some of the things when we study the seerah, when we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ. These are some of the takeaways we should have to benefit our community, not just simply acquiring, what month was he born in and what day, and, not just simply these kind of factoids, but, what is it about him that is, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رُسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that, as Allah says, without a doubt, in the example of the Messenger of Allah is a great example and benefit, an exemplar for you. So he marries Khadija, and he is approximately, most biographers put him at about 25 years old. So the Prophet ﷺ has about 15 years of marriage before he becomes a prophet. This is very interesting. And of course, during this time, he has, they have a very, very happy time in their marriage. But yet increasingly during this time, the Prophet ﷺ is feeling more and more unsettled by his people and their culture, and for lack of a better word, their civilization. And he begins to withdraw. He spends time right in the cave, reflecting deeply upon this. He's very unsettled by how he sees how they act. Was that a question or just maybe somebody's mic? So they have a number of children, right, with Khadija. So he has Al-Qasim and Abdullah, who has two sons that don't live into adulthood. And then he has, of course, his four daughters, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima. Only Fatima is there really at the end, that really lives, you could say, to the end of his nabuwah. Of course, two of his daughters wind up being married at different times to Uthman ibn Affan, which is curious, for some groups that have their issues with some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. As we say, it's better to, their affairs with Allah. But clearly, Uthman was somebody held in a very high esteem by the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, he entrusted 2 of his daughters to him, of which he did to nobody else. This really shows the esteem that he had for Uthman. So for those people that spend a lot of time criticizing Uthman, they should really also consider the fact that why did the Prophet ﷺ entrust 2 of his daughters to him? So all of them embraced Islam, and that they all passed away before his death, of course, except for Fatima az-Zahra, may Allah be pleased with her, who married his cousin Ali. So we're getting right up until just before the beginning of his Nubuwwah. And there's a few other things that we'll talk about, inshallah, I think next time. I do want to go a little bit into the life next time of Zayd ibn al-Haritha, who again comes on to be a very important person. In fact, maybe as we go through the seerah, I thought that what might be helpful is that as we encounter certain individuals, that we may go a little bit into the biography of them as well, because when you're talking about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you are also then talking about the men and women around him, and it's important to have information about their lives as well. So this is basically, there's not too many major events after the marriage of Muhammad and Khadija sallallahu alaihi wasallam radiyallahu anha and the beginning of his Nubuwwah. There's a few, but essentially Allah gives him a time of about 15 years to enjoy his life, and he's very well settled into he's very well settled into his married life, I guess you could say, when his Nubuwwah starts. As we know, he started by most biographers, they say at the age of 40. So we'll touch on those, inshallah. Now, anybody have any questions or comments? I can smell my wife's roasted chicken, man. It's talking to me. But as a takeaway, really reflect on how he was considered a trustworthy person. That when they were trying to figure out, well, how are they going to deal with this conflict, and they allowed him to be the one to, get the cloth and raise the stone and put the black stone in the Kaaba, that he was known as Al-Amin, that his wife entrusted him, even before they were married, his future wife entrusted him, right, with her business, that he became a person that people felt they could trust, confide, and so on, right? This is an extraordinarily important attribute for our community to inshallah, try to work to reclaim, that non-Muslims should know that when it comes to a Muslim, well, and obviously we are not perfect people, right? I'm not saying that we cannot commit sins or whatnot, but generally this should be one of the important virtues that we emphasize for our community is honesty, and also that people feel that they can trust, right? That they feel that they can open up to and that they can trust. And also, we should try, not everybody has this quality, but we should endeavor to be people, right? To be a people person, and to facilitate benefit for people. And this is why, of course, in the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, خَيْرَ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعَ النَّاسِ, right? The best people are those that benefit other people. As he said, he was the one that was able to not only take an adopted Abyssinian, this is another, maybe this will be the last point that we touch on. We forget that, Baraka, she came from a whole different culture. She was an African woman. And yet, he took her in and referred to this African woman that had gone through not Western chattel slavery, but had been enslaved and then freed, right? Referred to what? This is my mother after my mother. So he was able to cross cultural boundaries. He was able to cross generational boundaries, tribal boundaries, and bring people together such that when he adopted Zayd and he essentially his adopted mother, he brings them together and they're able to have happiness together. I think this is one of the most extraordinary qualities of the Prophet ﷺ, is his emotional intelligence, and something that inshallah we should try to reflect upon, even if we just do it amongst ourselves, our close friends, our family, people that we work with. How can we have the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ? Of course, none of us can have the intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ. None of us have, an angel delivering, a revelation, or Allah's protection, his isma, and yet we can be inspired by his personality, inshallah, to bring a little bit of that into our lives.